The air was thick with smoke and dust, carrying the bitter taste of burned metal. Jace Carter stumbled through the ruins of what had once been a busy trading post, his boots crunching over shattered glass and twisted steel. His oxygen mask hissed with each breath, filtering out the toxins that filled the sky after the bombardment. His mission was survival. Now his ship was gone, his comms were dead, and the colony was falling apart. Every sound in the distance could mean danger. Every shadow could hide death. He moved carefully, his rifle slung across his back, his eyes scanning for movement. And he heard a cry. Not the cry of a soldier or a wounded fighter, but something raw, sharp, and full of despair. It wasn't far. His instincts told him to avoid it. Cries meant trouble, but something in that sound froze him in place. It was a plea, not for mercy, not for life. It was for someone else. He followed it. The ruins led him to a cracked dome. Its glass panels shattered, letting in the harsh, yellow light of the planet's twin suns. Inside, he saw her. She was kneeling on the cold floor, her body curved protectively over something small. Her skin glowed faintly, a reddish hue marked, with pale silver patterns that shimmered like liquid metal under the dim light. She was not human clearly Virel, one of the ancient species that ruled this sector long before humans came. Tall, elegant, but now shaking with fear, her arms wrapped tightly around the tiny bundle in her lap. The child was barely moving, its small chest rising and falling in weak, uneven breaths. The mother's eyes, large and glowing like molten amber, snapped toward Jace as he stepped closer. In an instant, she grabbed a blade from the rubble and aimed it at him, her whole body trembling. Jace froze, raising his hands slowly to show he wasn't a threat. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice calm, his tone soft though. His heart pounded. The alien woman's lips pulled back slightly, revealing sharp, pearly teeth. Her voice came out like a hiss, her words shaky but clear enough through the translator chip in Jace's ear. "Stay back, human." Her blade trembled as her other hand clutched the child tighter, as if she feared Jace would rip the baby away. Jace kept his eyes on the infant instead of her weapon, and what he saw made his gut twist. The baby's skin glowed faintly blue where it should have been bright white. The breathing was shallow, almost non-existent. "That child was dying. I can help," Jace said firmly. She didn't respond, her breaths coming fast, her fear pouring out like heat from her body. He took a slow step forward, lowering himself, so he wasn't towering over her. "If you don't let me, your baby won't make it." The words hung heavy in the silence. For a second, she looked like she would strike. Her hand shook, her silver hair falling forward as her throat worked. In a hard swallow, then her voice broke. "Please." It was barely a whisper, a sound filled with pain and surrender. The blade clattered to the ground as she let it fall, her hands moving back to cradle her child's head gently. Her entire frame trembled as tears slid down her cheeks, glowing faintly like liquid fire. "Please, human, don't let my baby die." Jace moved quickly, his medical kit hitting the floor beside him. His fingers worked fast, pulling out scanners and an injector. The baby's pulse was almost gone. His mind raced as he analyzed the readings. Oxygen levels critical, blood proteins unstable. No wonder the atmosphere wasn't ideal for Virel infants, and the stress of the attack had made it worse. They didn't have hours, they barely had minutes. He bit back a curse and reached for his kit again, pulling out what little oxygen serum he had. The injector hissed as he pushed the fluid into the tiny vein, but the scanner still screamed red warnings. It wasn't enough. Erin, he guessed, that was her name by the markings on her wrist, watched with wide eyes, her hands trembling as she hovered over Jace, like a shadow. "Why is he still?" Her voice cracked, and a sob cut through her words. Jace shook his head, sweat running down his brow. "Your child's blood? It can't carry enough oxygen. It's collapsing fast." He looked at the readings again, his jaw tightening. There was only one way. It was insane. It was forbidden in every medical manual, but it was the only shot. He opened his survival pack and pulled out a sterile blade. Erin's eyes widened, her panic returning full force. What are you doing?" Her voice shook as she reached for his hand, but he stopped her with a look that burned with resolve. "Your child needs something that only I have, my blood." Her breath caught, disbelief and horror flashing across her face. "You can't. You will die." Jace gave a small, grim smile, already slicing a shallow line across his own arm. The red welled up bright against the pale dust. "Better me than your baby," he said quietly, and began setting up a crude transfusion line. For one frozen second, Erin just stared at him, the human who should have left her to die, the human who owed her nothing. And yet, here he was, bleeding for her child. A tear rolled down her cheek as she whispered, "Why?" Jace didn't look up, his voice low and steady. "Because no one deserves to lose their child. Not if I can stop it." The baby stirred faintly as the first drops of human blood entered its veins. Erin held her breath, her hands gripping the edges of the blanket as if the force of her hope alone could keep him alive. Outside, the sound of distant engines rumbled through the air. Someone was coming, and then the scanner beeped. The babies. Pulse flickered weakly on the screen, fighting to stay. Jace looked up, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's not out of danger yet." But before Erin could answer, a sharp metallic sound echoed outside the dome, a door crashing open. Heavy boots on broken glass. Jace's head snapped toward the sound, his heart pounding. Soldiers. They had found them. Asterisk, the door crashed open like a thunderclap, scattering glass and dust into the cold air. Jace froze for half a heartbeat, his own blood dripping into the fragile alien infant through the crude tube. Shadows moved in the doorway, tall, armored figures with weapons raised, their eyes glowing behind silver masks. Erin stiffened, her body snapping into a defensive crouch, even as she kept one arm curled protectively over her child. Her voice was sharp and low, vibrating with terror. Dravik's men. Jace's heart hammered. He had no cover, no time, and only one hand free. The other was still tied into the transfusion line. He looked at the scanner. Kale's pulse flickered weakly, clinging to life by a thread. If he stopped now, the baby would die. But if he stayed connected, they would. All died out. The first soldier stepped forward, voice metallic and cruel. "Surrender the child." The words hit the air like a blade. Erin hissed, her teeth flashing as her markings pulsed with anger. "You will not touch him." Her voice cracked like fire, but Jace saw the tremor in her arms. She was exhausted, trembling from fear and rage. Jace's mind spun like gears in overdrive. His arm burned, the blood loss making his vision blur at the edges, but he forced his body to move. In one swift motion, he ripped the tube from his vein, sealing the wound with a quick-press stim patch that stung like hell. The sudden stop sent a wave of dizziness crashing through him, but he ignored it. He grabbed the tiny figure of Kale, wrapping the baby gently in his jacket, and shoved the scanner into Erin's hands. "Hold him close. Don't stop watching that line." Before she could answer, the soldiers fired. Blue plasma lit up the dark like lightning, scorching holes through the shattered dome. Jace lunged, pulling Erin with him as they dove behind. A chunk of broken alloy. The baby let out a tiny sound, a weak whimper that cut through the chaos like a blade through silence. Erin clutched him tighter, tears sliding down her glowing cheeks. "Give us the child, and we might let you live." The lead soldier snarled, stepping over debris, his weapon aimed steady. Jace could hear the hum of its power core charging. One hit, and they'd be ashes. He took a shaky breath, pulling his sidearm from his belt with his remaining strength. It felt like dead weight in his hands. His blood-slicked fingers trembled. But his aim was steady because he wasn't aiming to kill. Not yet. He fired at the ground, blasting loose shards of the dome ceiling. Metal rained down in a clattering storm, forcing the soldiers to duck. In that split second, Jace dragged Aaron through a jagged opening in the wall, glass slicing his palms as they crawled into the shadowed corridors of the colony's old transit tunnels. The air was choking here, the smell of rust and decay wrapping. Around them like a shroud, the tunnels stretched into darkness, lined with pipes that hummed faintly from old power still running deep underground. Jace collapsed against a wall for a moment, fighting the dizziness that clawed at him. His muscles felt hollow, drained, but his eyes stayed on Aaron as she held Kale close to her chest. The scanner flickered red, then yellow. The baby was alive, but slipping again. How long? Aaron whispered, her voice shaking with panic. How long before? She couldn't finish the sentence. Jace swallowed hard, his throat raw. Minutes. Maybe less. He tore open his kit, fingers moving with desperate precision. He had nothing left that could sustain the child, nothing except the insane plan that had almost killed him already. But if he didn't do more, Kale wouldn't survive the hour. He looked at Aaron, her glowing eyes burning into his. Listen to me, he said, his voice hoarse but sharp. If you want him to live, you're going to have to break every law your people hold sacred. Her breath hitched, fear and rage flashing across her face. What do you mean? I need to do another transfusion. But this time it has to go deeper. Direct infusion. My blood, my oxygen, all of it. He pulled out a larger injector, the metal catching the dim light like a shard of fate. Aaron stared, frozen. In her world, this was beyond forbiddance. It was a violation of the blood, the sole emerging of life, meant only for the closest kin. Her hands tightened around Kale, her entire body trembling with the weight of that choice. Jace saw it. He saw the war inside her, the clash of pride, fear, and love. He leaned closer, his voice low and urgent. Forget your laws. Forget what they told you. Right now, it's him or nothing. Erin's breath came fast, her tears glowing as they fell. She looked down at her child's tiny face, blue glow fading to gray, and something broke inside. Her. She met Jace's eyes with a fierceness that stunned him. Do it. Jace didn't hesitate. He prepped the line, forcing his shaking hands to stay steady as he drove the injector into his arm, and then into the baby's fragile vein. His vision darkened at the edges, his pulse slowing as Kale's began to climb. The sound of boots echoed. Faintly down the tunnel, Dravik soldiers were hunting them like wolves. Erin's head snapped toward the noise, her body curling over Jace and Kale as if her own flesh could shield them. The air was heavy with fear, the hum of blood pumping between two species binding their fates together. And then, for the first time, Kale cried. A tiny, weak sound, but alive. Jace managed a faint smile, even as blackness began to swallow his vision. Told you. Not done yet, he whispered. But before Aaron could respond, a harsh beam of light cut through the tunnel, slicing across their faces. Voices barked orders in a language of iron and death. They had been found. Asterisk, the tunnel shook with the thundering stomp of boots, each echo pounding like a war drum in Jace's skull. The light grew brighter, slicing through the darkness, until it painted Erin's trembling hands in harsh white. She pressed herself against the cold wall, curling her body around Kale like a living shield. The baby whimpered softly, the sound barely audible over the metallic clicks of rifles being primed. He forced his eyes open. The world swam like water, black at the edges, his veins screaming as they emptied themselves into a life that wasn't his own. He could feel Kale's faint pulse strengthen against the makeshift tube, a rhythm fighting for survival. But every drop made him weaker. His lungs burned. His fingers were ice. Still, he held on. The first soldier appeared in the beam's glow. A towering figure in dark armor, face hidden behind a visor of crimson glass. His voice grated through a modulator, sharp and final. "And of the lying human?" The barrel of his weapon gleamed as it rose, aimed straight at Jace's skull. Erin moved before Jace could. With a sound that was half snarl, half scream, she launched herself forward. Her blade flashed like lightning in the dim glow, slashing across the soldier's arm. Sparks burst as his weapon clattered to the ground. He roared, swinging a heavy fist that sent Erin crashing against the wall with a sickening thud. "Erin!" Jace tried to rise, but his body collapsed under its own weight. Pain flared in his chest as the transfusion tube tore loose, spraying red across the metal floor. His vision blurred into streaks of silver and crimson, and for a heartbeat, he thought this was it. But then the baby cried a sharp, defiant sound that pierced the chaos. Kale's small body moved, his glow brighter than before. That cry snapped something inside Erin. With blood dripping from her mouth, she lunged again, faster than instinct. Her blade curved in a brutal arc, severing the second soldier's breathing line. He fell choking, his armor hissing like a dying beast. But there were more coming. Jace heard them. Heavy boots pounding closer. Voices barking orders. They were boxed in. He knew what would happen if Dravik's soldiers got Kale. That child wasn't just a life. They wanted him for something more. Something dangerous. Jace's hand fumbled at his belt, finding the pulse grenade he'd saved for his last stand. His thumb slid over the activator. He had seconds to make this choice. Blow the tunnel and bury them all, or find a way to get Erin and Kale out alive. His heart slammed against his ribs. There had to be another way. Erin. His voice was a rasp, barely a breath. She spun toward him, her silver hair streaked with blood, her glowing eyes wide with fear and fury. "Take him," Jace croaked, nodding at the infant. "Get to the east shaft. Emergency vents, they'll lead you out. What about you?" Her voice cracked, raw and jagged, carrying something more than fear, something almost like pain.jace. Gave a faint, crooked smile. "I'll catch up." A lie so fragile it could shatter on the air. Erin stared at him, her chest heaving, her hands trembling as she clutched Kale close. The scanner on her wrist flickered green for the first time. The baby was stable, alive because of this broken, bleeding human in front of her. She wanted to refuse, wanted to stay, but the sound of more soldiers crashing into the tunnel made the choice for her. Jace's thumb pressed the grenade activator. It hummed to life, glowing like a dying star in his palm. He locked eyes with her one last time. Go. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Erin's glowing tears slipped down her cheeks, catching the faint light as she whispered something in her language, a word that meant more than gratitude, more than farewell. Then she turned and ran, her footsteps echoing down the steel corridor. Kale's soft cry fading with distance. The soldiers stormed in like a wave of black armor, their weapons spitting light. Jace grinned through bloodied teeth, the grenade pulsing in his grip. "This one's for hope," he whispered, and closed his fist. The tunnel erupted in fire and light, swallowing the world whole. Asterisk, the sky was bleeding fire. Ash fell like snowflakes. As Erin sprinted across the shattered plains, her lungs burning with every breath. Behind her, the tunnel exploded into a blazing storm of light and smoke, a roaring beast swallowing metal and men alike. She didn't look back. She couldn't not when Kale's tiny weight pressed against her chest, his faint heartbeat pulsing. Like a fragile star against her skin, the wind howled over the ruins, carrying the bitter scent of scorched alloy and death. Erin's feet pounded over jagged rocks, her bioluminescent markings flickering like dying embers in the dark. Her arms tightened around her child, every step tearing at her strength. Her ears caught distant sounds, gunships roaring through, the toxic skies, soldiers barking orders like thunder. They were hunting her, and she had only one thought: keep Kale breathing. Her mind screamed with questions she didn't dare answer. Was Jace still alive? The blast had ripped through the tunnels like the wrath of the suns. No one could survive that. Yet the image of his bloodied smile burned in her memory, his last words echoing in her bones. Go. She wanted to hate him for it, but all she felt was a hollow ache deep in her chest, sharper than any blade. The scanner on her wrist blinked weak green signals Kale's vitals were holding, but only barely. The transfusion had saved him for now, but his fragile lungs were still fighting, his glow dimmer than it should be. He whimpered softly, and Erin bent her head, pressing her lips against his cool forehead. "Hush, little star," she whispered. In her language, her voice trembling. "Stay with me, please." The land stretched before her, a wasteland of broken spires and jagged glass plains shimmering under the twin suns. In the distance, a faint glimmer of hope signaled beacon, its pulse blinking like a heartbeat on the horizon. If she could reach it, maybe someone would hear. Maybe someone would come. But every instinct in her screamed a warning. The beacon would draw not just help, but hunters. Erin stopped for a moment, her legs trembling, the ground spinning beneath her. She sank to her knees behind the blackened husk of an old transport, shielding Kale from the cutting wind. Her hands shook as she adjusted the blanket around him, tucking him close to her chest, feeling the tiny rise and fall of his breath. A sob broke past her lips, raw and silent. Tears glowing faint as they slid down her cheeks, her thoughts drifted back to Jace, the human who bled for her child without hesitation, who stood against death with nothing but will and broken bones. She had believed his kind were selfish, violent, unworthy of trust. But he gave her something her own people would never have given a chance. A chance for Kale, for her. That truth cut deeper than any wound. The silence shattered with a low, thrumming growl of vengeance. Erin's head snapped up, her breath freezing in her throat. A dark shape tore through the clouds, a gunship, its lights sweeping the ground like hungry eyes. Dravik's crest gleamed on its hull. They were closer than she thought. Much closer. Her pulse spiked, panic clawing at her chest. She pulled Kale tighter, her heart hammering as the ship's searchlights carved across the ruins, closing in like blades of light. She couldn't run fast enough not across this open ground. She scanned the horizon desperately and saw it. A fracture in the earth, half hidden by shattered stone. A vent shaft, narrow but deep. Salvation or a tomb. She ran. Her legs screamed, her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. Rocks slashed her feet. The cold bit through her torn armor, but she hurled herself forward like a creature born of desperation. The roar of the gunship grew louder, a storm in the sky, its cannons primed with a low, deadly hum. Erin reached the vent and dropped to her knees, shoving Kale inside first, her hands shaking so hard she almost lost her grip. The baby whimpered, his glow flickering weakly as she slid in after him, pressing them both into the choking dark. The metal walls scraped her skin raw as she curled herself tight, her body a shield around Kale's fragile frame. The gunship hovered overhead, its searchlights slashing through the gloom, so close she could feel the vibration in her bones. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her heart threatening to tear through her chest as the shadow of death loomed over her hiding place, and then a sound she never expected. A voice, faint and broken, crackling through her earpiece. A voice she thought she'd never hear again. "Erin, you there?" Her heart stopped. For a second, she thought it was a dream, a cruel trick of her mind. But then it came again, weak, hoarse, like the last ember of a dying fire. "It's me." Jace, still breathing, barely. "You didn't think I'd quit that easy, did you?" Erin's hand clamped over her mouth to stifle the sob that tore from her throat. Tears spilled hot and glowing as she whispered back, her voice breaking, "You? Fool, you stubborn, impossible fool." "Get to the beacon," Jace rasped, coughing through static. "I'll find you." The signal cut out. Silence crashed in like a wave, but Erin's heart burned with something new, a spark of hope that refused to die. She pulled Cale closer, her jaw set, her voice a whisper of steel. "Hold on. Human, if you're alive, I'll make sure it stays." That way. Above her, the gunship drifted, its cannons turning. The hunt wasn't over. It had only begun. The beacon pulsed like a heartbeat in the distance, casting its pale blue glow through the toxic haze. Each flash felt like a whisper of hope and a scream of danger. Erin stared at it from the ridge, Cale cradled against her chest, his small breaths brushing like feathers against her skin. Her muscles ached, her blood sang with exhaustion, but she knew what the beacon meant. If she activated it, someone would come. But who? A rescue ship? Or Dravik's wolves? The hum of engines rolled through the broken canyons behind her. She ducked low, her silver-white hair plastered to her sweat-slick face as searchlights swept the jagged rocks like hungry predators. Every flash brought death closer. Her grip on Cale tightened until her claws bit into the worn fabric of her jacket. She whispered into the darkness, voice trembling. "Hush, little star. We're almost there." Jace's voice haunted her thoughts, faint and ragged through the static. "I'll find you." Against all reason, she clung to that promise like a lifeline. But how could he still be alive after that blast? How could any human survive? Such ruin? The image of him bleeding in the dark burned in her mind, and something sharp twisted in her chest, something she had no name for. The roar of engines surged closer, ripping her from thought. A gunship's shadow crawled across the rocks like a living beast, its cannons glowing with cold fire. There was no more time to hesitate. With a hiss of breath, Erin sprinted toward the beacon, her boots skidding on the glassy ground, every step a war against terror. The night split open with a shriek as plasma fire scorched the ridge behind her, sending shards of molten stone raining down. She didn't stop. She couldn't. She crashed into the clearing, the beacon rising before her like a spire of broken hope. Its controls blinked dimly, covered in dust and ash. She slammed her palm against the console, praying it still had power. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a low hum thrummed through the air as the beacon roared to life, its signal stabbing into the void like a desperate cry. Her breath tore from her chest as she sank to her knees, clutching Cale close. "Someone, please." Her voice cracked, lost in the wind. But salvation never comes alone. The gunship descended like a predator, its engines shrieking, its searchlights blinding white. Erin threw herself to the side as plasma blasts tore into the beacon, sending fire and shrapnel screaming into the sky. She rolled, curling her body over Cale as shards slashed her arms, her markings glowing bright with pain. From the belly of the ship, dark figures leapt, soldiers in black alloy armor, their rifles humming with death. They fanned out like a tide, surrounding her with cold precision. The leader stepped forward, towering and merciless, his voice a blade in the wind. "Give me the child," Dravik growled. his helmet retracting to reveal a face carved from iron, his eyes burning like twin suns of hate. He belongs to us, to the Varel future. Erin staggered to her feet, her body trembling, blood streaking her silver hair. Her arms tightened around Kale, and something primal lit her gaze, a mother's fury, bright and wild. He belongs to me. Dravik's lips curved into a cruel smile. Then die with him. The rifles rose as one. A voice cut through the storm like a gunshot. How about you die instead? Every head turned. Out of the smoke, limping and blood-streaked, came Jace. His armor hung in shredded plates, his arm bound with makeshift straps. His face pale as bone, but his eyes burned with a fire that made Erin's breath catch. In his hands gleamed a weapon no one expected, a pulse cannon ripped from a wrecked gunship, its core glowing like a newborn star. Surprise, Jace rasped, his voice rough and sharp as steel. Then he fired. The night erupted in light and thunder. Plasma blasts screamed across the clearing, soldiers scattering as the cannon roared with devastating fury. The shockwave hurled debris into the air, tearing craters into the ground. Dravik snarled, his blade igniting with crackling energy as he lunged straight at Jace, his movements a blur of lethal grace. Jace braced, but the hit came too fast. Warlord slammed into him with the force of a storm, sending the cannon skidding across the ground. The two crashed together in a brutal clash, fists and steel colliding in sparks and blood. Erin watched in frozen horror, torn between running and fighting, as Jace grappled with death itself. His strength was fading, his body broken, but his will blazed brighter than ever. Erin, he shouted, his voice raw and shattering through the chaos. Run! Save Kale! But she didn't move. Not this time. She set Kale down gently, wrapping him in the torn fabric of her cloak, and rose like a shadow of vengeance. Her blade slid from its sheath with a whisper of silver. Her voice was low, burning, as she stepped toward Dravik with eyes like molten fire. No more running. Blood steamed on the frozen ground as twin suns broke the horizon, staining the sky with crimson fire. The battlefield was a shattered circle of ash and glass, lit by the burning wreckage of the beacon and the smoke trails of falling gunships. In the center stood Erin and Dravik, two shadows, locked in a deadly dance, their blades flashing like shards of lightning in the rising dawn. Jace stumbled to his feet, every nerve screaming in agony. His pulse cannon lay smoking yards away. Useless now. His breath rasped in his throat, thick with blood, but his eyes never left Erin. She moved with a grace born of fury, silver-white hair whipping like molten threads, her markings glowing brighter than ever. But Dravik was a storm, his strikes. Heavy, relentless, each blow crashing down with enough force to split steel. Jace tried to move, to join the fight, but his body betrayed him. His knees buckled, and he dropped to the scorched earth. Pain blinded him as he clawed toward the cannon, dragging himself inch by inch. His blood painted the ground in dark streaks, each breath a knife in his lungs. He wasn't sure how much time he had left, but if he could buy 1 second for her, he'd give everything. Dravik's blade caught Erin's shoulder, and she staggered, her blood spraying in a luminous arc. A roar ripped from the warlord's throat as he slammed her, back against a jagged pillar, his massive hand clamping around her neck. "You think you can defy me?" He snarled, his breath hot against her skin. "You and that human will both burn." Erin's vision blurred, her body screaming for air, but deep in her chest, a fire raged hotter than fear. Her gaze flicked past Dravik and locked on Jace, broken, bleeding, still crawling toward the fight with death in his eyes. Something inside her shattered and reforged in that instant, a bond stronger than blood, stronger than law. With a guttural cry, she slammed her blade upward, driving it between the gaps in Dravik's armor. The warlord roared, his grip loosening, as silver blood sprayed across her arms. But he didn't fall. His other hand shot out, seizing her by the hair, yanking her close, his blade rising for the killing strike. Jace moved before thought. His body was fire and stone, but he hurled himself forward, a primal roar tearing from his throat. His hands closed around the fallen pulse cannon, not to fire, but to swing. With a savage cry, he brought the weapon down like a hammer against Dravik's skull. The impact exploded in sparks and blood, the warlord's head snapping sideways. With a sickening crunch, Dravik staggered, his blade slipping from his grasp. Erin seized the opening. With the strength of every heartbeat she fought for, she drove her dagger into his throat. His scream choked off as silver blood gushed, his massive frame crashing to the ground like a toppled monolith. Silence followed a heavy, aching silence broken only by the crackle of flames and the ragged breaths of two souls who refused to die. Erin dropped to her knees beside Jace, her hands trembling as she caught his face. His skin was ice, his blood soaking through what little armor remained. His eyes fluttered open, and a faint smile curved his lips. "Told you I'd find you," he rasped, asterisk. A soft cry pierced the silence, Kale. Erin turned, and there he was, glowing faint but alive, swaddled in torn fabric. His tiny hands reached blindly toward the light, toward her. She let out a sob that shook the stars themselves and gathered him close, pressing a trembling kiss to his forehead. When she looked back at Jace, her voice was a vow carved in steel. "You saved him. You saved us both. And I swear, human eye will never let you fall." Far above, the sky split with the roar of engines. Shadows of massive ships swept across. The burning Horizon human rescue craft, their guns still smoking from the wreck of Dravik's fleet. Jace tried to smile again, but darkness tugged at his edges. Erin's arms closed around him as the light from the dropships bathed them in silver fire, and as they lifted into the waiting sky, her child safe in one arm, the broken human clinging to life in the other. Erin whispered words no Virel had ever spoken to a human before, words that sealed a bond stronger than blood. "You're not just a soldier. You're ours now." The stars took them, carrying their story into the endless dark. The end. Asterisk.